After more than 2 decades in the state assembly, including 6 sessions as leader of the Republican conference, Oswego County Republican Will Barclay is trading in life at the Capitol, so we're checking in for an exit interview to explore the decision to leave and reflect on his time in the assembly. So your father was a well-known fixture in Albany, serving 2 decades in the state Senate, including as a GOP leader, and someone with that upbringing either runs in the opposite direction of that or follows in the footsteps. You clearly went the latter route. How come? Were there expectations or something like this? Was it something that always appealed to you?
Not at all, really. I'm the youngest out of 5 kids. I didn't know what I wanted to do when I got out of college. My father was an attorney. I looked and said, oh, it looks like he's, has a good, happy career. So I decided to go to law school. I did like politics. I used to follow him around. He was in the Senate from 64 to 84. So my older siblings were either off of college or away. So I was usually the last one around. So I went to a lot of events with my father. So I think something there gave me sort of the political bug. But that being said, I never really had any plans on running for political office. And I know you hear this probably from a lot of elected officials, but at the time, I actually was recruited to run it, and it was because it was redistricting. The counties are split up. Oswego and Onondaga was made up of the district, and I had a relationship on both those counties, so people came and asked if I wanted to run. So that's kind of how I ended up, but it wasn't something I had any grand design on. Certainly nothing my father encouraged me to do. He wasn't opposed to it, of course, but it wasn't like someone in this family is going to have to run for political office at some point.
Well, what was it like then taking on that front-facing political role? Because as you said, you're one of the youngest in the family, so I imagine not a lot of speaking time at the dinner table, so maybe not a chance to shine there. And if you're interested in politics, maybe you want to take more of a back seat, behind-the-scenes approach. So what was it like being out front, and was it something that came natural to you?
Well, again, as I said, I wasn't really planning on running for elected office. I had worked on campaigns, so I knew a little bit something about the political machinery and how to get elected. But I really ran, Dave, because at the time, my oldest son was 2 years old. My younger son was just born. And I'm the 8th generation of my family to live on the same property. They're the 9th generation. But I wanted to see if I could make a difference, and I wanted to see if I could do something that would keep them in the area. So that was sort of what pushed me over the edge to actually make the decision to run. I thought I'd do 6 years in Albany. I never thought I'd end up doing what turned out to be 24 years. But when I got down here, I really found that, one, I liked politics. I liked trying to build a better community, make New York State better. I liked doing all that. I really liked the other members of the conference and even across the aisle. And I liked the people I worked with, the staff. So it was like something I guess I didn't really anticipate, sort of the friendships and the connections I'd make in Albany. I always hoped I could do something good for my community, but those connections and friendships I made probably kept me in Albany longer than I maybe initially thought I would be.
We hear from new members often, oh, I support term limits, this isn't going to be my career, and then you talk about how life happens and you might end up in a different direction. Ultimately, when you look back at your time, do you think the legislature is best served by the current system, which allows someone to spend, if you're Dick Gottfried, 5 decades here, or do you think it would be better if there was forced turnover, that it wasn't just up to the voters to kick people out?
Well, it is funny how your perspective changes, because I think when I initially ran, I thought term limits were a good idea, but it's kind of hard for me to defend term limits after, we'll be serving 24 years in the assembly. There's no doubt getting new blood and energy into any organization is helpful, but there's also great institutional knowledge for people that have been there for a long time. There might be some sort of in-between amount that kind of makes sense for term limits. I wouldn't want them ever to be something so short that all the institutional knowledge is held by staff. I mean, elected officials should be the ones negotiating and making the decisions. And so, again, I think new blood's great, Dave, but at the same time, again, I was here for 24 years, and I think I was able to use that institutional knowledge that I had to make myself a better legislator as time went on. So I guess it cuts both ways, ultimately what I'm saying. But the only thing I wouldn't ever support is short, like 6 years. I think is probably too short of term limits. If they want to do 12 or something like that, I could possibly be open to something of that nature.
Well, let's talk about then the decision to leave at this point. what was the driving factor, and how were you influenced by the restrictions on outside income that are set to take effect, if they actually do take effect?
Well, that wasn't the driving force. I wouldn't say it didn't play a role. So, as you know, and now a number of years ago, when they did the pay raise, one of the caveats of the pay raise, you couldn't earn more than $35,000 of outside income. That did affect me. But really, my thought came to I'm 57 years old. One, I felt like I had done everything I probably could do in Albany in the confines that I was in. So I felt like success in that regard. I felt like I put my time into, again, try to help the community. And I either could stay in, I suppose, if the people would have me and reelect me, or it was time for me to maybe try to do something else while I'm still relatively young. So that was really the driving force for me. But yeah, I wouldn't lie and say outside income didn't play a role in it, but I wouldn't say it was a driving thing that made my decision.
Sticking with the outside income restrictions, though, do you think that is going to be influential in the shape of the legislature we have moving forward, or are we already past the point where the vast majority of lawmakers have outside income in excess of that $35,000 threshold, and it's not that big of a deal?
Yeah, I mean, the fact that the pay has been increased substantially, it was what 79.5 for a long, long time, and then it really increased substantially. I think that a lot of people think you can make it, I guess, a decent living in the legislature, and you don't need the outside income. So I think that has a big driving force of not having a lot of people with multi careers in there. Certainly the cap's going to do that, but I think that number of people earning outside incomes already shrunk
Yep.
pretty substantially. I don't support it. I think it's a bad idea because I think it makes everybody beholden to leadership. When you have just one source of income, you obviously want to protect that income, so you may not be willing to take political risk. You certainly look to leadership to try to help you get reelected. I think it limits backgrounds, certainly people that might come from different backgrounds and have different knowledge bases. I think now it's mostly, people that are going to be involved in government, obviously. But I also do think it strengthens leadership's ability to hold over a member that might not be there if they were, had income from other sources.
Well, during the final day of session, Assembly Speaker Carl Heastie, a Bronx Democrat, offered very tender remarks about your relationships and his feelings about you leaving the chamber. I can't imagine you anticipated something like that when you first got elected almost a quarter of a century ago, then Speaker Sheldon Silver running the chamber. I don't think he was going to offer the same heartfelt goodbye. So I'm curious, how did that friendly working relationship come together with Speaker Heastie?
Yeah, I would say I don't think Speaker Silver was a warm and fuzzy guy.
No.
That would probably be giving me a big hug on my way out the door. But Carl Heastie and we started close. I think he was a term ahead of me. So I knew him a little bit before we both got into leadership. We both had offices on the fifth floor of the LOB. So I had some relationship going in. But I think our friendship and mutual respect for one another really began when I became leader, because there's a lot of conversations that go on between the speaker and the leader, and you got to have a level of trust and respect of, each, it goes both ways, of one another, knowing that you can have a frank conversation and you're not going to immediately go out there and discuss that conversation with everybody. And you just have to have a level of trust. I think that we went through a few difficult things. Redistricting was a really tough thing to have to go through. And I think we just built sort of a relationship through some of those more difficult times that we could trust one another. And I think, again, it was based on mutual respect. So I think a lot of the speaker, he was always very straightforward with me and always had kept his word when he said he would. And I tried to do the same with him. And so I appreciate that leadership style and the relationship we had.
If you hadn't had a good relationship with the speaker, what would that have meant for your members and maybe the chamber operations more broadly?
Yeah, the one thing I just want to point out, David, even though we had I think, a relationship of mutual respect, there were times we certainly disagreed, and we disagreed very strongly. And I don't want to give anyone the impression that I would just roll over for the speaker if, the circumstance called for that. I didn't. We stuck up for our conference best.
No, we could speak to
but
hours and hours of debate that would suggest that you guys did not just roll over most of the time.
Thank you.
There are plenty of members who would say, those darn Assembly Republicans kept debating my bills.
Right. So very accurate. So, we have a role to play down there. What was your original? Now I'm
Just
laughing about the debate.
what would be the consequence of not even having that good of a
Oh,
relationship? Because I think there's understanding that you probably helped members get a lot of local bills through, help maintain some
right.
decorum that maybe wouldn't have existed without that bond. Things could have been meaner.
Well, well, they were. I mean, I witnessed that. Interestingly, when we started with Speaker Silver, I'm not trying to just kick Speaker Silver, but I think we maybe had one computer per office. The staffing levels were really unbalanced between the majority and the minority. So over time, the relationship, you do build on that. And that, because we had that relationship, I was able to go to the speaker and say, this is only fair that our conference gets some of the resources that the majority. Why is it that way? And he'd give me a good audience. I wouldn't say we got on parity level, but certainly I think he was tried to be fair to the extent that he could get away with doing that with his own politics that he has in his conference. So there's no doubt. I always said just because we disagree politically doesn't mean we have to be disagreeable to one another. And I really do believe that the 103 majority members out there, I maybe come close to agreeing politically with 4 or 5 of them. For the most part, the shift left, I don't agree at all with them politically, but I will say, I have a lot of respect. And I also look at people are trying to represent their constituents and as best they can. And their constituents tend to be, from a political perspective, very different than some of our constituents in our conference. So I try to start with that understanding. And then I always wanted to just play the cards I had. That's also important. I think some people think you get in there and blow things up and it's going to change the world. I was not of that mindset. I really thought we have a role as a minority. This is the cards we have, and we have to play these the most effectively that we can to actually have an impact on policy in New York State.
And after a quick break, we'll continue our conversation with Assemblymember Will Barclay, an Oswego County Republican who led the Assembly Republican Conference for 6 sessions before stepping away from the leadership post earlier this year after announcing they would not be seeking re-election this fall. Support for the Capitol Press Room comes from O'Donnell & Associates, a public affairs firm providing strategic guidance to businesses and nonprofits on navigating policy and regulatory issues. More information is available at o'donnellsolutions.com. I'm David Lombardo, and you're listening to WCNY's The Capitol Press Room. We're continuing our conversation with Assemblymember Will Barclay, an Oswego County Republican who served 6 sessions as the Assembly Republican leader before stepping down from the post earlier this year after announcing that he would not seek re-election this fall. We're conducting his exit interview, and we'll pick up our conversation discussing whether the relationship between Albany Democrats and Republicans is actually demonstrably better than the experience of Democrats and Republicans at the federal level.
Well, in some respects, I think New York's a different animal than D.C. Obviously, we have one-party rule in New York State. Democratic registration is, way outnumbers Republican registration. I think if things were maybe a bit closer, things could get a bit more contentious because obviously there's a lot to lose.
Like what we saw with the state Senate when it was up for grabs.
Exactly. Yeah, and how crazy that actually was. I do like to think some of it is a result of good relationships and friendships across the aisle. I hope that happens somewhere in the national level. But also the other big thing is that the amount of media attention on the federal level, I think, makes things more contentious sometimes versus what it would be on the state level that allows cleaner or friendships, I suppose, or a more open relationship with the other side.
Who are your friends in Albany on the Republican and Democratic side? Who do you fraternize with? Who do you like to hang out with? Who do you invite to your office after a long day of debating bills?
To talk more policy in my office? Is that what you're suggesting to?
At least that's the guise of the invite.
Well, as I said, I was young when I started. I was 32 when I started. I was always the youngest guy in the room. That was another reason I thought I might need to leave because I turned out I started being the oldest guy in the room. So I used to be good friends with Brian Cole, Bob Oakes, Jim Hayes. I don't know if those names all ring a bell, but I was sort of the young guy in that group. And then as they left, I became the old guy. But then, so I'm friends with Ed Ross, certainly is good friend, and I'm thrilled he's replaced me as minority leader. He's going to do a great job, or is doing a good job. So that group, I would say, Ed Robb, Phil Palmisano, my friend Gary Finch, before he left and passed away, he was probably one of my closest friends. Tom O'Mara in the Senate, like Leader Ort's a good friend. So, I mean, it's not surprising, but it's pretty wide breadth of people. But that's, my closest friend probably.
In 2008, you ran in a special election for the state Senate and lost by a few percentage points in a seat that Democrats hadn't held for a century. You were probably the victim of a blue wave, considering Democrats lost control of the seat immediately when it was up for grabs in 2010. Have you ever experienced a career setback like that before? And if not, how did that influence you moving forward?
Well, I try to block that out of my memory, Dave, but I appreciate you bringing that up. But
Sure.
No, it was a good lesson. First of all, that was a Republican district. It was definitely an upset that I lost. So it gives you a little humility. You realize that elections can be fickle things. You have to really pay attention to your constituency and make sure you're being responsive to that. I'm not saying those were the whole reasons why I lost, but there was a lot of reasons why it didn't come together. But it did. I think it made me probably more responsive elected official, and it certainly humbled you a little bit. There's no doubt about that. And so before I became leader, I ran the campaign team for the Assembly Campaign Committee, and that helped me a lot. Sort of understanding how messaging can be very effective in those races. And frankly, since that time, we've copied a lot of things that Democrats did to me during the Senate race. So, I mean, no one likes to lose. I wouldn't say I want to go back and do that all over again, but it probably made me a better elected official and also probably made me a better politician on the political side too.
Was it hard to go back to the assembly after that? Because I could imagine a world in which you say, screw this, I don't want to do this. I can make more money as a full-time practicing attorney, have less strife in my life. I don't have to be vulnerable like this again. I mean, was there that consideration at all? And if there was, how did you decide to keep going?
Well, first it was a special election, so I had I wasn't like losing my seat, so I still had the seat.
You chose to run again, though, in the fall, yeah.
I did, yeah. I wasn't going to. It's funny. I just all those things you just explained, Dave. Those certainly were emotions that I had, and I say, why am I doing it? But I decided to run again, and memories, I guess, are short, and that situation sort of faded from my mind, and I was able to focus on what I want to try to accomplish in the assembly. And obviously, it hurts. It's acute when it happens, but after a month or so, sort of faded in the background a little bit. And I want to renew my efforts again to try to drive public policy in in my mind, a better direction than it had been then. And that was always my motivating factor for running for re-election.
Well, let's talk about your experience in the legislature, because I think it's pretty well known that the most influential aspect of the Assembly Republicans, given the dynamic in the chamber, is their bully pulpit of sorts and their ability to use their speeches, their public remarks, their press to try to sway policy. But you also have the ability to get certain bills through, typically things that are more locally oriented. You can also bring back resources in the context of the budget. Where do you feel like you were particularly effective as first a rank and file member, and then how do you think you were effective as a leader?
Well, as a rank and file member, again, anybody, especially as a Republican, has to work with their colleagues to try to get anything accomplished. So I think I tried right away to build relationships, not only with other Republicans, that was sort of a natural, but across the aisle where I had to do. And I did build good relationships, particularly where it starts is usually on the local level with your fellow delegation members. And so some of that stuff we were able to get done wasn't really based on partisan. It was more geographic region. And so that was, I think, a good way to operate because we disagreed on a lot of things. There were some things local that we really agreed on that we worked together. My district at the time was a lot different, too. I had the western half of Onondaga County, so I shared a lot of territory with Democrats. They surrounded me, essentially. So those relationships worked, and when we needed to get something done locally, I would work with that delegation to get it done. As I became more senior and as leader, obviously, the way I tried to work with the speaker or any of the chairs of the respective committees or whatever, I don't know how to express it. I try not to be unreasonable on things. Again, politics always plays a role, and I want to make sure our conference was first in my mind and that we could get everything that we need to get done and get. But at the same time, I understand some pragmatic parts of politics that you can't think you're going to get the world. You have to be patient and not try to say, I'm going to get statewide legislation passed, and if we don't get this, I'm going to shut the place down or something like that. Just it's not realistic in the circumstance that we were in. So I try to just use that type of attitude going in, and it seemed to be effective. The big thing you were talking about, though, is the bully pulpit, and I try to use that as leader the best I could. So we try to do we did a lot of press conferences with the Senate Republicans. I thought that gave us a stronger voice when we did that. That's probably one of the biggest changes, obviously, when the Senate went from majority to the minority. Their priorities shifted to some degree where they could align more with us as the Assembly Republicans. So we ended up doing a lot more press together. And that, I think, gave us a stronger, louder voice.
Do you feel like you have any unfinished business from your time in the legislature? Is there a bill or a development of some sort that you always had been hoping to get across the finish line and just fell short?
Well, there's a number of bills. There's small bills. There's this rural roads bill that has been a thorn in my side forever that low maintenance roads, they don't have to maintain them if they're not used a lot. And that's a big issue, believe it or not, in our area. And I was able to get a pilot program through for one town, but I wanted to get it statewide legislation passed. So I wasn't able to get that. But I don't want to oversell. That's not a huge deal. The one thing I hope, and it seems like it's heading in the right direction, I'm going to continue to even advocate for after I'm out. One of the successes I had, and it wasn't just me, it was a team effort, but it was keeping the nuke plants open. I represent Oswego County. And being able to keep Fitzpatrick open was a big, big win for us. Now we're moving on to the next level where we'd like to, build another nuke plant or multiple nuke plants in Oswego County. So that's something I want to remain active in and advocating for. And things look like with the governor's support, looks like hopefully we're heading in that right direction.
Let's stick with the future then. What does the future entail, and how soon before we hear about the lobbying efforts of Will Barclay, and then we start a countdown clock on your 2-year ban for the legislature? I mean, what does the future look like?
Well, listen, I'll never say never, but that's really not what I have in mind for myself. So I'm an attorney. I've been a practicing attorney throughout my time in the legislature. So I plan on spending more time. The law firm's been very kind to letting me do this political thing. So I need to spend a little more time there, which I plan on doing. I look forward to doing that. I'm also blessed to have a number of family businesses that I'm active in. I'd like to take a little bit more time and focus on developing a few ideas I have there. So those are really the two major things that I'll probably be occupying my time. The other thing, being in office didn't allow me to do a lot of volunteer type work, like on various not-for-profit boards. So I look forward to getting involved in a few charities that I have locally that I'd like to be helpful with. So there's a lot of things that I look forward to undertaking. Not one, I don't have like a job lined up and saying I'm just transferring from the legislature into this one job. It's more a continuation, which I've done, but probably wasn't able to invest as much time as, I'd like to now that I'm in public office.
Life in Albany is often described as like sleepaway camp or summer camp because people leave their lives behind and come to this just unique environment where they are living for a few days and they're getting fed, and people often get up to shenanigans. They have stories that they can tell, some they can't tell. I'm curious if you've got any good Planet Albany stories that you'd like to get off your chest now. Anything that is particularly fun and not going to open you up to criminal liability?
That I have to tell? I think I have to sign some sort of non-disclosure agreements.
Your staff signed it for you.
They signed.
Yep.
Yeah.
Stephanie Benton signed the paperwork.
Yeah, I love it. I think, again, one of the reasons I stayed as long as I did was the relationships you're able to build, particularly with other members, because sometimes you really are in the foxhole with those members, and I think that builds a certain relationship with them. And I think back at, again, Gary Finch, he was a funeral director, and some of the stories, he was probably one of the best storytellers I've ever met in my life, but he could tell some wonderful stories. I felt like after sitting next to him for a number of years in the assembly, I felt like I could start running maybe the funeral director's business because he had so many great stories. I understood that you would tell me about the business itself, the ins and outs. So those are sort of unique things I probably wouldn't be exposed to in other areas of life that I was able to get through. And Gary's just one example of that. But I don't know. Pacific stories, there's so many to tell, Dave, but I don't want to bore your listeners with my entertaining times that I had in Albany.
Well, we've been speaking with Assemblymember Will Barclay. He is a Oswego County Republican who's hanging up his time in public service after more than 2 decades here in the Assembly. Assemblymember, thank you so much for making the time. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
Support for the Capitol Press Room is provided by New York State United Teachers, a statewide union of nearly 700,000 professionals in education and healthcare.